Hey, what's up guys, it's Justin here, and today I've got the full comparison for you between the Samsung Galaxy S5 and the HTC One M8. Perhaps two of the hottest Android phones of the year, at least right now. And although both of these companies did not go for a complete overhaul for their successors of last year, instead they had built upon some of the features that consumers had enjoyed, but at the same time adding a few new features along the way. And aside from the fact that they share pretty much the same core specs with the Snapdragon 801 processor, you will notice quite a few differences from there. But in this comparison, I'll be walking through each major category of both of these smartphones and see how they stack up, ultimately allowing you to decide which one will be better for you. So without further ado, let's get on with this comparison. So the first category we're going to look at is the hardware. Right off the bat, you could tell that both of these companies had taken different approaches, HTC going with the same metal design as they had last year, and Samsung sticking to the plastic. And I have to say that both of these phones did feel really nice in the hand. The HTC One, of course, giving you more of a premium feel with this metal construction, you really can't argue with that. While on the other hand, I also really enjoyed the smooth textured back on the Samsung Galaxy S5. And of course, the HTC One comes in heavier at 160 grams compared to 145 and 9.35 millimeters thick as opposed to 8.1. On the bottom of these phones, you've got your micro USB port for charging and syncing. On the HTC, you've also got your headphone jack located on the bottom. And on the Samsung Galaxy S5, you have USB 3.0 support for faster charging and syncing. And you've also got a port cover because, as you know, the S5 does have an IP67 rating, which means it is water resistant and also dust proof. However, if you do look into the term of IP67, it actually claims that it is waterproof of up to 1 meter for 30 minutes. However, Samsung doesn't exactly encourage that, and they just claim it as water resistant. When it comes to the location of the SIM and SD card slots, both these devices have them located quite differently. On the S5, of course, you have your removable plastic back, which allows you to locate your micro SIM and also your micro SD, as well as your battery, while on the HTC One, you have a nano SIM card on one side and also your micro SD card slot on the other, both of which will support up to a micro SD card of 128 gigabytes. When it comes to button placement, you've got your volume rockers on the right side, and there's no buttons on the left side. However, your sleep wake and power button is located on the top, which if you saw my review, it was one of the bigger drawbacks I felt of the HTC One. The Samsung Galaxy S5, on the other hand, has the buttons much more naturally placed in my opinion. It has your power button located on the right side and your volume rockers located on the left side, making it very easy to access both, especially if you have small hands. Another difference seen between these two devices is that HTC has ditched the capacitive touch buttons and instead moved them onto the screen, while Samsung still has their physical home button and also capacitive touch back and menu button. And just some additional things to know, on the Samsung Galaxy S5 you have a fingerprint sensor and also a heart rate sensor located on the back right below the camera. When it comes to the displays on both these devices, it is absolutely gorgeous. On the S5, you got a 5.1-inch 1920 by 1080 resolution display with a 432 ppi. This is a Super AMOLED display. And on the HTC One, you've got a 5-inch 1920 by 1080 resolution 441 ppi display. And although there is a small difference in the ppi due to the screen size differences, I rest assured you will never notice a difference. Where you will notice a difference, however, is the color representation between both of these displays, and I'm not trying to emphasize that one is better than the other. In the end, it really comes down to the personal preference. And if you may know, on the Samsung line of phones, especially with the S4 and now the S5, thanks to the Super AMOLED display, it is known to have more of an exaggerated color tone. In fact, DisplayMate, who carries out some in-depth tests on smartphone displays, dubbed the S5's display as the best performing smartphone display that they have ever tested. Colors just stick out a little bit more saturated in general, while on the HTC phones, you will notice that the display color representation is more accurate and what I'd call more natural. Now moving over to the software of these two devices, they both ship with Android 4.4 KitKat, and that is pretty much where the similarities end in terms of the software. Since both these companies do have their own respective skins built on top of Android, with the HTC One having Sense 6 and the Samsung Galaxy S5 with TouchWiz. And after you see my demo between both these devices, it is pretty safe to say that both of these companies have gone with a bit of a different look and feel compared to each other. So starting out with the S5 and TouchWiz, you will notice that it is very snappy, and of course that is to be expected. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is the My Magazine. You can see that the overall layout is very tidy, just one article at a time being displayed in a vertical form, and you're able to select all your different topics and also your social media that you would like displayed on your magazine. And this is located to the left of your home screen. And going on to the app drawer, you can see that it is a horizontal swipe, and in general a lot of that has stayed the same as we saw on the Samsung Galaxy S4. And here's just a look at some of your options you have within your drawer. And of course with Android you do expect quite a bit of customization, so let's take a look at the interface for that. So you can see there you are able to very easily add different widgets, set your main home screen, and also change your wallpaper, and also have some home screen settings. Now going on to the pull down, you'll notice that Samsung has gone with the same overall layout. However, visually they have cleaned it up just a little bit with the icons. You have all your quick toggle settings as you know and expect from the top, and you also have your quick brightness and then your notifications. Some people may like the fact that you can quickly toggle your favorite settings that you probably often have to access, while others may want just an overall cleaner look of their notification tab. So now onto our settings menu, and you can see that Samsung has gone with a very visual layout with the nice rounded icons, and in general I think it is quite visually appealing. However, at first you may have a hard time trying to find your way around, but you can also set it to list view if that makes things easier, but I have to say I'm actually a pretty big fan of it. I overall really enjoy the look of the icons, and for me I actually found it a little bit easier to find my way around. Heading right back to our home screen, by holding the home button you are taken directly to Google Now, and by hitting the menu button it will show all of your recent applications. You can close them all at once, and you can also clear up your RAM if you have any active applications. And on the back button you are able to access some of the multitasking features that Samsung has been very well known for, which personally I've really come to love on the Samsung Galaxy Note 3 since it really took advantage of the screen real estate, but I found that it still works really well on the Samsung Galaxy S5, and I'm sure a lot of people will be using this for multitasking, and this is what Samsung calls multi-window, which allows you to run two applications on the screen at once and also very easily rescale it whenever you need to. Once again, going back to our home screen, we're going to take a really quick look at our camera application. Of course, I will go more in depth at the camera portion of this video, but you can see that Samsung has a whole bunch of modes. We definitely saw that with the S4, and we see that here again with the S5, and that really is a great thing. On the top, you also have your additional settings for the photo and video. And of course, from Samsung, you're also able to utilize its motion and air view gestures, as well as the Smart Stay and Smart Pause eye tracking features that were first introduced to the Samsung Galaxy S4, but for the most part, I have them turned off. Next up, we're taking a look at the HTC One M8 running Sense 6 UI. You can see that it gives you a much different interface, both visually and functionally. And there to the left, you've got your blink feed, which is HTC's version of the news feed located just to the left of your home screen. You're once again able to select different topics and even sources, but also your social media, and also have a quick access to add it straight to your favorite relays such as Pocket. I found myself using Blink Feed much more now, more than I did with Sense 5, and I feel that HTC has done a great job improving it. Next up, we're going to look at the app drawer, and you can see that they have gone with a much different look to it as opposed to Samsung had, with a vertical swipe instead of a horizontal swipe when moving between your pages. And you do have a few settings, but you don't have as many as you would find on Samsung, which is totally fine. What HTC has done with the notification tab is probably my favorite. They have kept the notification tab very clean, no quick toggle settings or anything. All you got to do is tap the square on the top right and you are taken to your quick toggle settings, which is a lot reminiscent of stock Android. Onto the settings, you'll see that HTC has gone with a nice white interface and flat icons, pretty much all the same color, a much different approach that Samsung took with their colorful and dark layout. Hitting the menu button, you got all your recent apps in the card layout. You can close those all at once, and holding on the home button, you'll be taken directly to Google Now anywhere. As for the back button, that is pretty much just for going back. Taking a look at the customization settings on the HTC, you can just pinch in from two corners and you are able to change or add widgets and different applications to your home screen. And once again, giving a quick look at the camera menu. Like I said, I will go into more depth at the camera section of this video. You have in general, simple interface like we saw a lot around HTC Sense, with the nice rounded icon layout now to switch between the modes. And one last thing is you also have the motion launch, which is kind of borrowed from LG, but is a great function on the HTC. You double tap to wake and double tap to sleep, swipe up and it'll take you to your home screen, and swipe from the left side and that will take you directly to Blink Feed. So that is about it for the HTC One. And to cap it off, I'm sure you guys noticed a difference in terms of the visual and functional interface between HTC Sense and also TouchWiz. And it comes down to whether you enjoy a more feature-packed interface or you would kind of just like the cleaner and simpler approach that HTC has taken. So now onto the camera, the differences between these two phones continue. As you know, Samsung kind of goes by the theory of the bigger the better, while HTC has gone towards the opposite. On the Samsung Galaxy S5, you've got a 16 megapixel camera and a single flash, but also the ability to record 4K video, which we first saw on the Galaxy Note 3, which by the way looks absolutely amazing. On the HTC One, you've got a 4 ultra-pixel camera, and yes, that is theoretically 4 megapixels. However, they claim that it does have a much larger pixel size as opposed to higher megapixel cameras able to capture some more light per pixel. What you see on the top is probably something you haven't seen on a smartphone before, and that is what HTC calls the dual pixel. It is able to capture depth information for every picture you take, and it allows you to pretty much refocus your image or add some cool effects after you take the picture. Flipping over to the front, you've got a 2 megapixel front-facing camera on the Samsung Galaxy S5 and a 5 megapixel wide-angle lens camera on the HTC One. So before moving on to the real-life camera test, I'm going to take you guys in depth on the camera apps between both of these phones. So first off, you can switch between the cameras easily on the Samsung Galaxy S5. You also have a quick access mode that's called selective focus, and you can pretty much select the foreground and background objects that you want it to focus on. And by the way, Samsung claims that the autofocus on the S5 is ultra fast at 0.3 seconds. Next up, you've got your settings in a grid view, and I found that pretty easy to access all the things I need to. You can easily turn things on and off, set the picture size, also the video resolution, recording mode, and just some additional options as well as HDR, flash, and stuff like that. So as you've come to expect from Samsung, like we saw in the S4, there is a ton of different camera modes. You have your auto, beauty face, shot and more, panorama, and virtual tour, as well as your dual camera. You even have the option to download some more, and I found that there wasn't as many as there was on the S4, but at the same time I noticed that I didn't really use much of them on the S4 either. So now moving on to the gallery, you could see that it has a nice layout, of course, that is to be expected, and now we're just going to see some of the options it gives you in terms of editing your photo after you take it. Of course, you can auto enhance your photo, and that is pretty standard. A lot of times I do find myself using that. You also have the option to add some cool filters or effects on it. They do give you quite a few options there as well. Adjustments such as rotate and scale, and also some more specific settings such as the brightness, contrast, saturation, temperature, hue, and even some options just to decorate, draw over your image, and just have some fun with that. So now moving on to the HTC One, at first glance it is a pretty simple interface, and by tapping those 3 dots you're given some more options. Most of the time you're going to have that set on auto. You can also set your white balance, your ISO and stuff like that, and even have it as a preset, and there you can see are some additional functions for your camera. On the top you have your flash control, whether that is on auto, on, or off, and by sliding down from the edge of the screen you're able to switch cameras very easily. I also really like the layout of the camera in terms of navigating between different modes, the nice rounded and very clean look to it. And you also have the option to do dual capture like we saw on the Samsung, and also panoramic images through Pan 360. So now we're going to go on to the gallery and see what additional functions or options they allow you to do after you take the image. So by tapping the edit button, the first options that pretty much come up are ones that take advantage of your dual camera, including U-focus, foregrounder, seasons, 3D dimension, and moving on you've got your filters that you can add to your pictures, of course, also some different frames. There's actually quite a few options, and also your typical crop and rotate. So now let's scroll over to a photo that would be able to give a good representation of the dual camera functions. So once again, tapping the edit button, you have your U-focus, which allows you to refocus the image, and I would say in some situations it worked great, and in other situations not so much. You can see there I was able to tap on the background, and very quickly it was able to focus on that, and tapping back on the plants you can see it gives it a nice macro look to the image with the depth of field. You can also use that to add some cool effects to it, and once again that also takes advantage of the dual camera and its depth information. So now we're taking a look at some images from the Samsung Galaxy S5 and the HTC One M8. So from these images, as you know, the images have to be cropped down to both fit on the same page, but where the 16 megapixels really shines is when you actually blow it up into full size. That is where you'll notice a huge difference compared to the 4 megapixel sensor on the HTC One. And it's almost safe to say that you can see that in some cases the vibrance on the images from the Samsung Galaxy S5 are just a little bit greater as opposed to the HTC One M8, and I feel that it also handled the pictures in general in different lighting situations a little bit better. But in optimal conditions, the HTC One still took some very nice pictures, so it really comes down to personal preference as to which one you think takes a better picture. When it comes to the low light though, the Samsung Galaxy S5 and the HTC One definitely both handled it very well. This was taken in a pitch black room, and using the built-in flash on both of these devices, I would say that both of them did a very good job. However, in the image, when you look at it at full size, the HTC One definitely had the colors just a little bit smoother. And now onto the front-facing camera. These were actually taken from the same distance. So the Samsung Galaxy S5 definitely took a wider image, and the HTC One, I felt that it processed the colors just a little bit better than it did on the S5. So now onto the 1080p video test. I know that the Samsung Galaxy S5 is able to record 4K, but for the sake of this video, I decided to test these two phones at the same settings. So you can see here that the Samsung Galaxy S5 has a much more saturated or exaggerated color as opposed to the HTC One M8's a little bit of a flatter look. I felt that the S5 did have a little bit more detail in the video, and I'm sure a lot of you would agree with me on that. But in general, as you may have seen me compare with the other phones, the HTC One does have a little bit of a flatter look in its camera in general, and some people might actually prefer that. But I felt the S5 handled video especially very nicely. So up to now in this comparison, I'm sure you have realized that these two phones have tons of differences. And I don't care if you're an Apple fanboy, a Samsung fanboy, or anything else, you've got to agree that HTC simply has the best speakers built into a smartphone, period. This is what HTC calls the boom sound speaker technology, and I simply wish that more companies would take the approach of placing the speakers square on the front of the phone, where obviously that is the logical place to put it, as a lot of times you're consuming media while you're looking at the screen and not the back of the phone. So now it's time to hear for yourself, and both of these phones were at top volume. Obviously, the battery is probably the most important part of the phone, as without a good battery life, you aren't able to get on with your day while taking advantage of your very powerful new smartphone. And I'm glad to say that both of these phones definitely succeed in that category. On the HTC One, it features a 2600 mAh battery, while on the Samsung Galaxy S5, you got a slightly larger battery at 2800 mAh. And from using the HTC One for over 2 weeks and the Samsung Galaxy S5 for a few days, from my testing, I'll tell you that both of these phones were able to make it through one day no problem, and even about halfway through the second day before requiring to be charged. If you are an owner of the Samsung Galaxy S5 though, you're also able to purchase a separate battery and carry that with you at all times, and thanks to the plastic removable back, you can just take that off and put in a new battery. While for the HTC One, you might need a hammer and a few sets of pry tool. So the last thing we're going to compare between these two phones is the benchmark test, and the reason why I left this last is a lot of people simply don't care about the benchmark scores, and I will tell you that the scores really don't reflect on the performance difference of these two phones. Both North American variants having a Snapdragon 801 processor, with the S5 clocked slightly higher at 2.5 GHz and the HTC One M8 clocked in at 2.3 GHz. So you could see here that the benchmark score on the S5 was just slightly higher. Moving on to the Antutu benchmark, you can see once again we see a slight difference, with the S5 coming in at 37,185 and the HTC One very close at 36,380. The next benchmark I ran, again testing the CPU and GPU performance, was Quadrant, and on the S5 you got a score of about 23,000, and on the HTC One you got a score of about 25,000, so you can see that these scores are going a little bit back and forth between these two devices. So the last test I ran was 3D Mark, which tests out the graphics and GPU handling of both of these devices. The HTC One came out with a score of nearly 21,000 and the Samsung Galaxy S5 at 18,239. But again, I'll emphasize that you literally cannot distinguish the difference in terms of the benchmark scores between both of these phones. In terms of everyday use and even intensive use, both of these phones will perform great and literally have no problem handling any tasks you throw at it, including gaming and stuff like that. As both of these phones in their North American variants feature the same processor, except for the S5 being clocked slightly higher. So now onto my final verdict, and I'll try and tell you that both of these phones kind of fit into different parts of the spectrum on the Android line. They are both flagship phones, they feature the same processor, but aside from that, there are very few similarities between both of these devices in terms of the software, the hardware approaches that both companies have taken, the camera approaches. And there are just so many things you have to consider when you're trying to decide whether you want a Samsung Galaxy S5 or the HTC One. And my best recommendation is to simply have both of them in your hands, play around with the interface, look around at the hardware and the feel of the phone, and decide which one is better for you. As that is not the decision I should ultimately be making for you, as you are going to be the one that's going to be using the phone, and whichever one makes you happier is ultimately going to be the better one for you. But aside from that, be sure to leave your comments down below as to which one you prefer, and I'll see you all in the next video.